last week we got to talk about a really unique God with a unique creation story, and we get to trust that story, right? We get to be a part of that. But there's something really important here that identifies something unique in the same way about mankind. Which is important, because we always look and we're like, we just need to focus on God and we need to focus on his story.
Right.
And we kind of ignore that we're a part, we're a pretty dynamic part of it.
Very.
Yeah, and that
Very.
he has some cares and implications there. And so, and I know this is a really big deal for you. I wonder if you unpack a little bit here about this passage where it refers to we are made in his image. What's the significance there?
So part of the significance you begin to see out of the passage with what you see right before this. And so in the verses that precede this, there's the creation of all of the other animals. And it expresses the image that they're created in, and it's of their own kind. In fact, you see that repeated again and again and again.
That phrase is repeated over and over and over.
Yes.
Of their own kind.
Uh-huh. And then all of a sudden you get to the end where it's the creation of people. And it changes, and it's no small thing. In fact, I think ancient hearers of this, it would have perked them up. They would have seen this as a really big deal.
If I'm reading, I'm going to go according to their kind, according to their kind,
Yep.
according to their kind. Then I'm going to get made in his image.
Yes.
And it's going to hit me.
Yes.
Yeah.
When it comes to the creation of people, that they are created in the image of God. That would have been a shocker to everyone. And the implications of that are absolutely huge.
Yeah, I want us to talk about why it would be so shocking. Like, you say that would have been so shocking, and we go, oh, okay, but there's a reason that would have been so shocking. And I think a lot of it has to do with the creation narrative's positioned around it.
Yes. That, again, like we looked at this in one of the other lessons, everyone would have understood all the creation narratives that they had ever read as saying the world around them is just the byproduct. It's an afterthought. And that human beings are just, they're peons, they're serfs, they're only there.
They're inconsequential.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just, as long as you provide something good, then you have value. But if you don't provide something good, like, you don't have any value. And all of a sudden here, there's this sense to be made in the image of God says something really profound about your value, because it's the way God sees you.
Right. And it's always struck me, I think when I started working at Casas, I came in going, so God is ultimately amazing and valuable, and I am nothing. And that's the way I think he wants me to see myself. And that's because, and I felt like I was being very spiritual to articulate it that way. Like, it was like I was doing my duty in worship. And I remember so many conversations with you where we were kind of arguing our way back and forth about some of this, because we have a deep belief that we not see ourselves that way. Not because we want to overinflate human beings.
No, but it's to see human beings in the same way that God would see us, that Scripture talks about us. And one of the reasons this is so important is because it helps us understand how we see other people. So if I'm worried about inflating myself in some way that would be dishonoring to God, and by that end up lowering myself down to some real low level.
Like, I'm a wretch, or I'm
yes,
bad, or
I'm the worm.
I'm inconsequential.
Yeah,
something.
Then think about what happens when I go through, in a practical way, day to day, I go through my day, how do I start seeing other people, right? Everything I begin seeing them by is, how good are you? How much worth do you bring? And without realizing it, we actually create a way of viewing people and ourselves that's not mirroring Scripture, but it's actually mirroring all of those other creation myths going back to ancient times. And it gets back to, you're only as valuable as what you can produce.
Which you talked about last time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You are more than what you make, type of a thing. Yeah, so there's good reasons to not ignore this passage, right? but there's also really important things in this from that worth and value perspective. So we hold a sense of value. We hold a sense of worth. God's made us in his image. He's distinguished us in creation. And one of the things that I've always thought is, I was like, yeah, but then we lose that. And what I've come to realize is I don't think there's any place in the early text that articulates and they lost this. Like there's no.
Yeah. In fact, what you see is this throughout Scripture is trying to bring people back to the place where they can see it and embrace it and live out of it.
Because when you live out of it, what happens?
It changes everything in your life. You begin to carry a sense of worth that is appropriate. Not a sense of worth that is arrogance,
right?
That is...
It's not overinflated.
Exactly.
We're not talking about like bolster your pride so that
right.
needs to get deflated and knocked down.
Right.
It's a healthy sense, a healthy view of who you are and who God's made you.
Yeah, and when we live out of that, it actually helps us trust God more.
Right.
Because if I'm living out of a deflated sense of who I am, then I can't just trust God at face value. Mm-hmm. I'm constantly contending. Right. I'm constantly and looking at other people and constantly comparing my value to how I would measure up against them. Mm-hmm. And it actually pulls you away from love and affection and care by God and your ability to love and care for other people.
Maybe in a weird way of talking about it, when you embrace and accept the fact that you are made in God's image, it helps you get out of your own way. Like, it's a weird thing where you're like, man, if I think too much, I'm gonna be too much. And the reality is you become too much when you think too little of yourself, because you compensate and you do all this stuff. And you become too much when you try to overinflate with pride and all these things. When you have a healthy view that you're made in God's image, you can get out of your own way, and that becomes really powerful, because for the first time you can embrace and accept the love God has for you, and you can actually just go love other people without worry, consequence, fear. Like you can just step into that because you see that. Yeah.
You see this with kids. When a child has this really good sense of attachment or bonding to their parents,
right.
They live out of that in a way that carries a kind of security that's really good, really healthy. I think about like John, when John writes in one of his letters,
the disciple whom Jesus loved.
yeah. And he has this great thing about love and how love ultimately pushes out all fear. Mm-hmm. And it's like John's trying to get us back to, I want you to just live out of who you are. And the more you embrace that, the easier it is to understand God's love for your life, but the easier it is then for you to love God back, to love other people, to just like get out of your own way and just... That the kid that has that really good relationship with their parent, it's like they're not worrying about how they do or don't measure up to their parent. They just rest in it.
Right.
And they get out of their own way, so to speak.
So in a base level of talking about this, we can just say this. Genesis becomes really clear that different than other ancient creation narratives that saw humans as inconsequential, that it sees us with an inherent kind of value because God has made us in his image, and that is no small thing.
Yeah.
One thing that's really, really important when it comes to the idea of being made in the image of God that we see come out of Scripture is this idea of dominion, which admittedly is a word that we don't use very often in
right.
modern day English. Like if I were to walk up to somebody and say like, hey, you have dominion, they would just, that sounds like I'm like they're in a cult or I'm doing something weird. Right. Like nobody knows what that is. But it's like a really, really important word. Mm-hmm. And it comes from the Hebrew word radah. Mm-hmm. Which carries a kind of authority. And so in like ancient cultures, they didn't use this word for just everybody.
No, not used lightly at all. It was used for like kings and rulers and
Right. So when the Bible looks at us, right? So when God really looks at us and says, like, you have dominion, right? It says he gave them dominion over the plants and the animals and the things. When it says he gives us dominion, like, you're not a king, I'm not a king, and yet you as a human being have this inherent kind of dominion, that's not a small thing at all.
no. And again, it's unique to human beings, couched in this space of how we are created in the image of God, that
Right.
we have like dominion. And if anyone's ever spent time with 3-year-olds, you understand every human being has dominion.
Because 3-year-olds exercise their dominion?
Yeah, that's right.
They're
And
like, no. And you're like, okay, there's that.
yeah. And part of the reason this is so important is because we often think of dominion in terms of like will or like willfulness. And the first place we want to go is like, oh, that's bad. But really, when you look at Genesis, it can be used in bad ways, but it's a really good, beautiful thing that actually reflects something of God.
Like when
in
a
us.
when a 3-year-old is pitching a temper tantrum as a use of their authority,
Yeah.
right? We would look and go, I hate that. That
Yes,
is so hard.
it's
As a
messing
parent,
with my life.
Yeah, as a parent,
Yeah.
you're like, that is rough. But when I see a teenager look and go, I don't want to make that decision because of what that does for my life. What I want is to actually walk in this direction because I want my life to go that direction. We look and we're like, I'm so proud of you.
Yeah.
There's something about the use of dominion and how we use it that matters.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that we have it.
Yeah, like when you think about our spiritual lives aren't how to eliminate will and dominion in our lives. It's learning how to use it in a healthy, godly way.
Right.
In all of this.
So when I first started learning about dominion, a thing that popped in the back of my head, or just had existed there all the time, was this idea of like, so God has one specific, like God is in control, which he is. He has one specific plan. He's this, I saw God like the master chess player who everything was needed to function a certain way. And my job as like a Christian was to figure out, not like, I never thought like of my own dominion. What I thought was like, what I need to do is somehow figure out what God's using his dominion for so that I can make sure I please him or I do the right things or have all this. And that's not like, that actually flies in the face of what Genesis is trying to convey to us.
Yeah, and I even went through that a little bit, down to like, okay, God, exactly what do you want me to do today? This isn't about me at all. This is and yet missing that idea of God saying, no, I want you to choose. I've given you authority to choose. That what he's not looking for is Stepford wives, right? Like that we would look at that actually and go, ugh. And what he's looking at here is he's asking us to actually be responsible for our lives. There's a great amount of responsibility that goes with dominion.
And I think that comes with the reference to like kings and rulers. There's a part where they have these subjects and there's these people and lands. And we look and we're like, wow, that's an amazing kind of dominion. But at the same time, there's a responsibility to that would have been inherently felt. And that's all contained in that word, radah, that gets used in Genesis.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing that you see about Genesis too is it's not like God says, okay, you have dominion and now I'm disappearing from your life. And it's not like we're given dominion as human beings and then are just like guideless as to what to do. Even in the text, there's this idea that like, okay, here's the world that I'm giving you. Now, use your dominion to do something good and beautiful in this world that actually carries the values and goodness of what we see with God in it.
I think one of the things that helped me along the way, because there's like a good kind of dominion and dominion can go wrong,
right?
Depending on how it's used. But is that it's not a free-for-all. Dominion's supposed to be guided by values. So I may not always know how to leverage responsibility or how to leverage some of these things, but I do know that like if I'm loving people, if I'm loving myself, if I'm seeking the good of others, there's like a responsible use of the dominion God's given me that kind of works all together with creation, with the world he's created. And I feel like it ends up feeling like the gears are in sync. Like nothing's grinding, nothing's Nothing's messing up. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like God is, what you see in Genesis 1 and 2 is this idea he's inviting us to participate with what he's doing. So he's still like the ultimate guide and creator in all of this. But it's like we get with our dominion to step in and get to be a part of joining God, and at the same time owning our own lives and getting to exercise something that contributes to this world. But we feel it in those moments where there's a sense of value and love that we feel in getting to exercise what that means.
One of the things I learned in my counseling classes at some point in time, we took these developmental classes that affirmed all of this stuff. And they brought out a couple of research studies that highlighted one of the most significant deterrents or helps to successful aging in people when they were studying senior adult populations. And they found that there was one factor that was the strongest single factor that helped people like live long and really like pleasing lives, like happy lives, more or less. And I thought, much like what you thought, because I know we've talked about this once before, like purpose was going to be like, you have to have a singular purpose. And purpose was on a list, but it was like number 3. The number 1 thing was what they called locus of control. And what that can be equated to is dominion, a personal sense of felt authority. Like my choices and what I'm doing and my direction matters. And what they found is that when people were checking people into nursing homes or engaging people in assisted care facilities, that if that person felt like their choices mattered and like they got to choose some things and they got to determine the direction for their life, they aged really well and they stayed really healthy. And when they lost that, meaning when someone else said like, no, they can't make choices, I'm going to take those choices.
Even if they're good choices for them.
Yep. When they lost that, their biology shifted to the degree that their brain, hearts, and bodies began to decay at a much more rapid rate, and those people die early. And what's crazy about this is you think all the way back to being created in the image of God. There's a strong argument to be made that we're hardwired with a need for dominion, and that not exercising it, not having it, diminishing it, actually might hurt us in some pretty significant ways. So it's a really, really important deal.
Yeah, super important.
Right.
And understanding if that is how God made us. So now, like, how do we use that? How do we step into that in a way that is good and beautiful and guided by God in some way?
So God made us in his image, which means you have dominion. There's an authority and responsibility guided by good values. And I think the real question is, how do you want to use that?
Mm-hmm.
One other really important thing about being made in the image of God is this idea of freedom. We talked about dominion, and then there's this other really, really big characteristic. And we talk about this all the time around here.
Yeah.
Like this is part of our mission statement. This has become such a like deep ingrained thing.
Uh-huh.
But freedom becomes absolutely essential to not just Jesus setting you free, but that being made in the image of God, every human being has a kind of freedom that's really, really important.
Yeah, because it gets back to the core of living out of who God created you to be. And if you're trying to live out of something he didn't create you to be, even if you feel like it's a good thing, there's a deep loss there in all of this.
Right. So the place we see this in Genesis that's really significant is, and this was lost on me for a lot of years. Like I remember when I think it was you that first kind of talked to me about this, right? I always saw this as just like a blip in the story. Never cared. I never really paused and cared too much about it. And then I remember you going like, well, what does it mean when God asked Adam to name the animals? And I was like, it means God asked Adam to name the animals. Like that's
right.
That's what this was. Because I didn't understand the way ancient cultures would have even read Hebrew poetry. There was a lot for me to look at. I've learned along the way that this is actually a pretty big deal. And I wonder if you'd articulate a little bit about it.
Yeah, there's a reason why it's in this creation narrative. And the whole idea behind naming the animals is that God is giving something away that normally would have been God's job to do. I was talking with a rabbi who talked about the Hebrew in this a little bit, and it really gave me a different perspective on it. He said in the Hebrew, there's this kind of idea that when God says, "Okay, I want you to go name the animals," it carries the idea that God is like, "Okay, I'm excited to see what Adam is going to choose in naming the animals." Like there was a delight in God to give this freedom to Adam for Adam to choose. Not like God was saying, "Okay, it's your job to name the animals, and I'm going to see if you name them correctly. I know what they need to be named."
This is the big test. Right?
Yes, yeah.
Almost like when your kid's like, "Hey, can I eat this piece of cake right now?" And you're like, "You can do that if you think that's the best decision."
Right, yeah.
And then you watch them walk to the fridge to get the thing, and you're like, "What do you do?" No, that was the wrong choice.
Right.
Like you've already got the predetermined. This is what you need to do.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. This is like your kid with an art project, and you're bringing out the supplies, and what you desire is, I want to see what you do. Like as a parent, like you like this. Yeah. You're really giving freedom away.
Well, and I almost wonder if God could take it a step further than that, which of course he's God. But like we as parents, we go, "I want to see what you're going to do because I have no idea. And you're you and I'm me." I think there's something about God actually infusing good and beautiful things, like consciously infusing good and beautiful things into us and creating, that I think there's a genuine delight in us living those things out with our freedom. Like it's not so much that he's just hands off going like, "This is going to be exciting," because my brain breaks. He knows the future.
Right, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
The Hebrews, when your rabbi friend was saying that, I know the way that a rabbi.
Yeah, he's not trying to say God
doesn't know the future.
No.
Or is like, "I wonder what's going to happen," like a suspense movie. It's a genuine kind of excitement about, man, I put these things in this person, and they're getting to use that to exercise freedom in this powerful way, and God is delighting in this because he created us.
Yes. Like, so when we read Genesis 1 and 2, it's really important to understand what is the point that God is trying to do with this. And it's not the theology of like the side of, we're going to study the deep nature of God in what does he really know all things, or does he not?
How does it all work all the time?
That's right.
Yeah, no.
It's relational.
Right.
In fact, when you look at this type of language and you think back to the earliest people that would have been reading and hearing the Genesis story, we know from a historical standpoint and a cultural standpoint, the number one question they were asking, or one of the number one questions is, how is God wanting to relate to me?
Right.
Not what does God know or not know? How does he want to relate to me? And this story of how God is relating to Adam is letting all of these ancient people, including us, go, "Oh, like he gave Adam dominion, and now he's giving him this freedom with this dominion. Adam, you've got the freedom. Like, go use your creativity. Use all that I've created in you and do something with it."
Right. Which there's an enormous amount of trust and honoring, and like there's a value piece in this that comes from that's really extraordinary. You know, one of the things that I've had conversations about people having freedom. I can't tell you how many times in the last couple of years. I think even with our mission, it was one of those words where people are like, "What is this? What do you mean when you say freedom?" And then we would articulate it. There'd be nervousness.
Right.
And the nervousness that I've experienced from people is, but what if you have freedom and you don't know what to do? Like, so there's some people, I know you're wired this way. If I'm like, "Hey, you have total freedom," you're like, "I love it," because you want as like few walls in your life as possible, right? In fact, you'd love to sleep outdoors.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. But there's some people that the idea of like sleeping outdoors, they like, no, I need walls and a roof, and I need structure, and I need I need to understand how it all works, right? And so freedom I've experienced for some people can feel scary.
Right.
And I wonder, I know we've walked through this with quite a few. I wonder if, like, what do you say to them? Because I bet you there's somebody who's taking this class at this particular moment that's going, So I love the idea of freedom until I have it and don't know what to do. Then it's scary.
Oh, that's a great question. So here's the thing about freedom that I would say to any of you that are just like feel a little nervous about it.
Which is normal.
Yeah, totally. Is step into it and take small steps. Step into it. And I think what you'll find is it's not a kind of freedom that takes you away from God. Like if I just go act in a way that's free, now I'm like moving further and further away from God. I think when Adam named those animals, he had an interaction with God that actually started creating bonds. In fact, I think about this in my own life with my dad. So my parents were pretty good about giving my sister and I a lot of freedom at appropriate times in our life. And there was one when I was in high school, and maybe some of you'd go, okay, that's way too much freedom.
They gave me more freedom than I know how to wrap my head around.
Yeah. We were talking, and my parents had built a house, and it was a few years later, and we had no back porch, and the sun would come up, and we always talked, we needed a porch, whatever. And one day my dad and I was probably complaining about it for some reason. My dad was just like, so why don't you build a porch? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go build a porch. And I'm in high school, right? And my dad's just like, go do it. Like, and so I went down to the hardware store and started buying lumber. I designed it, like all of these things, and I just started building it. Now, there were points in there where I was just like, ooh, I don't...
a permanent structure on his parents' house.
Yeah.
We should...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still there. It's still like it didn't fall down, right? But there was this thing of like, wow, I felt the responsibility, but not like this terrible weightiness of being judged. It was like, my dad actually trusts me.
Right.
And that bonded me to him. And there were moments, of course, where it was just like, okay, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, because there's no way you got that porch right.
No. And my dad was there to actually teach me something. But I wasn't open to that teaching until I was at a place where I experienced a moment where, ooh, I really need to understand this. Drew me back to my dad. I still got to exercise that freedom. And I come out of that, and that story is one that I just look back on and go, I'm closer to my dad,
right,
even today, because of the freedom he gave me,
right,
in how that was exercised.
I think that's really key. I think that mirrors some of the biggest things that I've learned with this, and it's that freedom doesn't have to be scary. Freedom can, it is sometimes, because nobody likes not knowing what to do, especially in your life in the moments that matter to you, right? That's a big deal. And going like, okay, so I'm going to freely choose even if I don't know what the right thing is. That's hard. What I always thought was that like I need to figure that out and choose that to be right, and that's what and that's freedom. Like, or I'm just going to be left out to dry, and that's freedom. And what I've realized, freedom really is a journey where God goes with you.
Yeah.
And he's a part of this, and you're learning, and when you mess up, there's a recorrection and a learning there, and you end up not always making the right choice, but you become the right person along the way, because you're standing in who he made you to be. Yeah. And that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's like really, really good.
Because it's more about the relationship than it is at the end of the day, did I make all the correct choices?
Right.
My dad didn't sit back and go, okay, there's one design for the back porch that's correct. Mm-hmm. Let's see if Glenn gets it correct. I think to my dad, that was less important than just the whole process of how we related together through that project, and that he got to see me grow a little bit from things that he had already taught me that I probably wasn't even aware of. Mm-hmm. So
and I think God has the same thing for us. I think he loves you. He loves us. He made you in his image. He gives you dominion. He gives you freedom. And that, again, is no small thing.